A kid gave her lunch to a homeless man. Next morning, 4 luxury cars waited at her door. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The wind that scoured the canyons of Serenity Gap carried the taste of dust and endings. It was a lonely wind, one that spoke of long winters and forgotten graves. Elspeth Thorne knew its language intimately. It had been her most constant companion for the 2 years since the mine collapse had taken her husband, Thomas, and left her with nothing but a small, stubborn patch of land, a daughter with eyes too old for her 7 years, and a silence in her heart so vast it echoed. Her farm was a testament to endurance, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of a valley that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. The soil was stubborn, the creek fickle, and the nearest town, Redemption, was a place of hard stairs and closed doors. Elspeth was a widow, and in this part of the world, that was a kind of ailment, a weakness that men like Jedediah Kane could smell like blood in the water. Kane owned the valley. He owned the land office, the water rights, the freight company, and the fearful deference of every soul in Redemption. He wanted Elspeth's land. Her small plot was unremarkable except for one thing. The stream that trickled through, it was the only one in the valley that hadn't run dry in the long drought. He had made offers, his voice smooth and predatory, his words laced with a pity that felt more like a threat. Elspeth refused each time, her voice quiet but her spine forged from the same iron as her late husband's will. Her defiance was a slow, simmering insult to Kane, and he had begun to squeeze. The price for seed was higher for her at the general store. The freight wagon that once collected her meager harvest of beans and corn now passed her gate without stopping. She was being slowly, methodically starved out, and the entire valley was complicit in its silence. Her days were a litany of hard labor, her hands, once soft, now calloused and cracked. She mended fences, tilled the unyielding earth, and tried to shield her daughter, Maya, from the gnawing hunger and the creeping despair. Maya was a quiet child, her laughter a rare and precious currency. She spent her days exploring the edges of their property, her only companion a small, crudely carved wooden bird Thomas had made for her. It was on a Tuesday, under a sky the color of a faded bruise, that the small act of grace occurred. Elspeth had ridden into Redemption for the mail, leaving Maya with a strict warning to stay near the house. In her pocket was her last biscuit, saved from the previous night's sparse meal, a small comfort for the long, dispiriting ride home. In the center of town, near the public well, a small crowd had gathered. They were not talking, but watching, their expressions a mixture of scorn and fear. In the center of their circle of judgment was a man. He was little more than a scarecrow of a human being, his clothes tattered, his beard a matted tangle, his eyes holding a wild, feverish light. He was known only as the Ghost of the Ridge, a failed prospector who had lost his mind and his fortune in the unforgiving hills. The town children sometimes threw stones at him. The adults simply pretended he didn't exist. Jedediah Kane stood on the porch of the land office, watching with a look of smug satisfaction. He enjoyed these small displays of public cruelty. They reinforced the order of his world. As Maya sat on the top rail of her own fence, waiting for her mother's return, she saw the man stumbling away from the town, his retreat marked by the jeers that followed him. He staggered along the dusty road that bordered their farm, his body swaying with a weakness that went beyond hunger. He tripped and fell not 20 yards from her gate. He didn't get up. He simply lay in the dust, a broken, discarded thing. Maya watched him for a long, silent moment. She looked at the biscuit in her small hand, her own stomach aching with a familiar emptiness. She thought of her mother's tired face, of the worried lines that seemed to deepen with each passing day. Then, she slid from the fence, her small boots making no sound in the thick dust. She approached the man cautiously, her heart thumping like a trapped bird. She knelt beside him and gently nudged his shoulder. He flinched, his eyes flying open, wild and distrustful. She didn't speak. She simply held out the biscuit. The man stared at it as if he didn't understand. His gaze shifted from the biscuit to her small, serious face. He saw no pity there, no scorn, only a simple, solemn offering. Hesitantly, his trembling, dirt-caked fingers reached out and took it. His hand brushed hers, his skin rough as bark. He pushed himself into a sitting position and devoured the biscuit in 2 ravenous bites, crumbs clinging to his ragged beard. When it was gone, he looked at her again. The wildness in his eyes had receded, replaced by a flicker of something ancient and profound, a dawning, astonished gratitude. Maya simply nodded, as if to say, "You're welcome," then turned and ran back to the safety of her yard, her small heart filled with a feeling she did not have a name for. When Elspeth returned, weary and empty-handed, Maya said nothing of the man or the biscuit. It was her secret, a small, fragile seed of kindness planted in the desolate soil of their lives. That night, Elspeth lay awake, listening to the wind and the gnawing sound of her own fear. Kane's pressure was mounting. The foreclosure notice would come soon. She knew it. She had no allies, no hope, no way out. She had fought for so long, but the valley was finally about to swallow her whole. She did not know that the small seed her daughter had planted was, even then, beginning to take root in the most unexpected of places, preparing to grow into a fortress that would save them all. The morning after Maya's act of quiet charity, the world seemed unchanged. The sun rose with the same reluctant pallor, the wind whispered the same lonely secrets, and a gnawing ache of hunger in Elspeth's stomach was a familiar, unwelcome guest. She moved through her morning chores with a heavy heart, the threat of Jedediah Kane's foreclosure a constant, oppressive weight. She milked their single, bony cow, her mind calculating how long the milk would last, how long they could survive on the meager stores in their pantry. She expected the day to unfold like all the others, a slow, draining battle against an inevitable defeat. The arrival of the carriage was so incongruous, so utterly alien to the landscape of her life, that at first she thought she was imagining it. It appeared on the horizon, a sleek, black specter drawn by 4 perfectly matched black horses, their harnesses gleaming with polished silver. It moved with a smooth, silent grace that was an insult to the rough, rutted road. It was a vessel from another world, a world of wealth and power she could not comprehend. Her heart seized with a new kind of fear. This was Kane. He had sent his lawyers, his enforcers, come to deliver the final blow not with a quiet notice tacked to her door, but with this ostentatious display of his absolute power. She stood frozen in her yard, the milk bucket still in her hand, and watched as the carriage pulled to a stop before her gate. The driver, a man in a crisp, dark uniform, dismounted and opened the door. 2 men emerged. They were not the rough, sun-beaten men of the valley. They wore dark, impeccably tailored suits, their shoes polished to a mirror shine despite the dust. One was older, with silver hair and a face that was a mask of stern professionalism. The other was younger, his expression sharp and intelligent. They moved with an air of quiet, unshakable authority. They walked to her gate, opened it without a hint of hesitation, and approached her where she stood. Elspeth's hand tightened on the bucket's handle, her knuckles white. She lifted her chin, her pride, the only weapon she had left. "If you're here for Mr. Kane," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "you can tell him the farm is not for sale." The older man, the one who was clearly in charge, stopped before her. He removed his hat, a gesture of respect that was so unexpected it disarmed her completely. "We are not here for Mr. Kane, Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "We are here for you." Elspeth stared at him, her mind reeling with confusion. I don't understand." "My name is Julian Croft," the man said. "I'm the lead counsel for the Argent Corporation. This," he gestured to the younger man, "is my associate, Mr. Davies. We are here on behalf of our client." "Your client?" Elspeth repeated, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "I don't know anyone from a corporation." "I believe you do," Julian said, a faint, cryptic smile touching his lips, though perhaps not under the best of circumstances. At that moment, a third figure stepped out of the carriage. He was the man from the ridge, the ghost, but he was transformed. The matted beard was gone, revealing a strong, square jaw. The tangled hair had been cut and combed. He was dressed in a suit that was as fine as those of his companions, its dark wool tailored to a frame that was no longer gaunt, but lean and powerful. The wild, feverish light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, intelligent intensity that was startling. He looked directly at Elspeth, and she saw him, truly saw him for the first time. This was not a madman. This was a man of immense, formidable presence. He walked toward her, his expensive shoes stirring the same dust he had collapsed in only the day before. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze holding hers. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice no longer a rough growl, but clear and educated, with the faint, clipped accent of the East. "My name is Elias Vance, and I owe you and your daughter a debt I can never fully repay." Maya, who had come out onto the porch, her small face a mixture of fear and wonder, let out a small gasp. She recognized him. This was her man, the man she had saved with a biscuit. Elias Vance's gaze softened as he looked at the small girl on the porch. "It seems," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he did not try to hide, "that a single act of kindness can, in fact, change the entire world." Elspeth could only stare, her mind struggling to reconcile the ragged prospector with the powerful, composed man who stood before her. The world had tilted on its axis. The rules she thought she understood no longer applied. What is happening?" she finally managed to whisper. Julian Croft stepped forward again, his professional demeanor returning. "Mr. Vance, our client, is the majority owner and founder of the Argent Corporation, a mining and railroad conglomerate. He came to this valley several years ago, incognito, to personally scout a new silver lode he had discovered. Unfortunately, he was the victim of a hostile business maneuver by Mr. Jedediah Kane, who used fraudulent geological reports to seize control of Mr. Vance's local mining operation and then orchestrated a campaign to ruin his reputation, leaving him stranded and without resources." The story was laid out in clean, simple sentences, but Elspeth could read between the lines. She saw the story of a man betrayed, stripped of his identity, and left for dead by the same man who was now trying to destroy her. "For the past 2 years," Julian continued, "we have been searching for Mr. Vance. His sudden disappearance was alarming. It was only by a stroke of luck that one of our surveyors, passing through the next county, heard a rumor of a mad prospector on the ridge and sent word. We arrived in Redemption yesterday. We were making inquiries when Mr. Vance found us." Elias Vance took a step closer to Elspeth. "Yesterday, I had lost all hope," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I was ready to let the valley claim me. Your daughter, she didn't just give me a biscuit, Mrs. Thorne. She gave me back my will to live. She reminded me that there is still goodness in this world, even in the darkest of places. That single act of grace gave me the strength to walk into that town and find my people." The weight of his words was staggering. Elspeth looked at her daughter, at this small, quiet girl who, with a simple act of compassion, had set in motion a chain of events that was now culminating in this unbelievable scene in her dusty farmyard. "Now then," Julian Croft said, his voice taking on a sharp, businesslike edge as he opened a leather portfolio. "To the matter at hand, the debt. Mr. Vance insists on repaying it in full. First, he pulled out a thick, notarized document, the deed to this farm. It has been purchased from the bank, and the title is now in your name, free and clear, with all back taxes paid in perpetuity." He handed it to her. Her hand trembled as she took the heavy paper. It felt impossible, a dream. "Second," Julian continued, pulling out another document, "Mr. Vance has, this morning, acquired a controlling interest in the Redemption Valley Bank, the freight company, and the land office. In short, Mrs. Thorne, he has acquired Mr. Kane." A slow, stunned silence fell over the yard. In the space of a single morning, the entire power structure of the valley had been dismantled and rebuilt. Jedediah Kane, the petty tyrant who had ruled their lives, was now nothing more than an employee of the man he had tried to destroy. And third, Julian said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his professional reserve, a delivery. He gestured to the carriage. The driver opened a rear compartment, and he and a younger associate began to unload an astonishing array of goods. Sacks of flour, crates of canned goods, bolts of fine wool cloth, new tools, leather boots, a side of smoked bacon, a large, beautiful porcelain doll with eyes as blue as a summer sky. It was a king's ransom, a bounty of everything she and Maya had dreamed of, piled in the humble dust of her yard. The display of overwhelming generosity was too much. Elspeth's knees felt weak. The milk bucket finally slipped from her grasp, clattering to the ground, its contents spreading in a white pool at her feet. She didn't notice. She was looking at Elias Vance, at the man whose life her daughter had saved, and who, in turn, was now saving theirs. "This is too much," she whispered, her voice choked. "It is not nearly enough," Elias replied softly. He walked to the porch and knelt before Maya. He did not touch her, but his eyes held a reverence that was more powerful than any embrace. "Your name is Maya?" he asked gently. She nodded, clutching her small wooden bird. "Maya," he repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "I will never forget you, or what you did for me." The morning sun, finally breaking through the clouds, bathed the scene in a warm, golden light. The wind had died down, and for the first time since her husband's death, the silence in Elspeth's heart was not one of emptiness, but of a profound, astonished, and overwhelming peace. The world she had known, a world of hardship and fear, had been irrevocably, miraculously transformed. And it had all started with a single, small biscuit, offered without expectation, a simple act of grace that had redeemed an entire valley. The aftermath of Elias Vance's return was a quiet earthquake that reshaped the entire landscape of Serenity Gap. The news of Jedediah Kane's fall from grace traveled on the wind, whispered in the general store, debated over poker games in the saloon, and discussed in hushed tones over Sunday dinners. Kane himself seemed to shrink overnight. The blustering arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. He was a king who had been deposed, forced to watch as the man he had scorned now held the deeds to his empire. He did not confront Elias, but his hatred was a palpable thing, a cold shadow that lingered at the edges of the town. Elias, however, paid him no mind. He was not interested in revenge. He was interested in rebuilding. He established a temporary office in the finest suite of the town's only hotel, and from there, with Julian Croft at his side, he began to systematically undo the damage Kane had wrought. He renegotiated the water rights, ensuring the small, independent farmers received a fair share. He restructured the bank's loan policies, offering fair terms to those Kane had been bleeding dry. He invested in the town, commissioning the construction of a new schoolhouse and bringing in a real doctor to replace the aging, whiskey-soaked physician who had served the community for 40 years. He was not a savior descending from on high. He was a careful, thoughtful gardener, tending to a patch of earth that had been neglected for too long. For Elspeth and Maya, life was transformed. Their pantry was full. Their roof no longer leaked, and the gnawing fear of tomorrow was gone, replaced by a sense of security that was as warm and comforting as a fire on a winter's night. But the greatest change was not material. It was the return of hope. Elspeth found herself humming as she baked, her movements light and free. Maya's laughter, once so rare, now filled the small farmhouse with its bright, clear music. Elias was a frequent visitor to the farm. He would arrive not in his fine carriage, but on a simple, sturdy horse, dressed not in a suit, but in practical, well-made work clothes. He was drawn to the quiet peace of their small homestead, a sanctuary from the complexities of his other life. He would sit on the porch with Elspeth, speaking of his plans for the valley, his voice full of a passion for building that she understood completely. He was a creator like her, and he found a deep satisfaction in making things whole again. He developed a special, tender bond with Maya. He never condescended to her or treated her like a child. He spoke to her as an equal, with a quiet, solemn respect. He taught her how to identify the constellations, just as her own father had once done. He showed her how to carve wood, his large, capable hands guiding her small ones as she shaped a piece of pine into a lopsided but recognizable wolf. He listened, truly listened, to her stories about the small adventures of her day. He was filling a void in her life that Elspeth had feared would remain empty forever. A deep and abiding affection grew between Elspeth and Elias, a love born not of sudden passion, but of shared hardship, mutual respect, and a profound, soul-deep recognition. She saw in him not the powerful magnate, but the man who had been broken and had found the strength to rise again. He saw in her not a pitiable widow, but a woman of incredible resilience and quiet grace. They were two halves of a whole, their broken pieces fitting together perfectly. Their courtship was a slow, gentle dance, conducted over shared cups of coffee on the porch as the sun set, over quiet walks by the creek, over the simple, domestic rhythm of their intertwined lives. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing he had built for her, the stars beginning to prick the deep velvet of the sky, he turned to her, his expression serious. "Elspeth," he said, his voice low, "I've spent the last few years living as a ghost. I had forgotten what it felt like to be a man. You and your daughter, you brought me back to life." He took a small, velvet box from his pocket. He opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, a single, clear diamond that seemed to capture the light of all the stars above them. "I know it's soon," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know you have a life you have built here. But I cannot imagine my life, the real life that has just begun for me, without you and Maya in it. Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Elspeth's face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a joy so profound, so overwhelming, it felt as if her heart might burst. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh yes, Caleb. Elias. Yes." He slipped a ring on her finger, a perfect fit. They were married a month later, not in a grand church, but in the yard of the farmhouse, under the shade of a tall cottonwood tree. The entire valley came, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine affection for the couple who had shown them what true leadership and true community looked like. Even Jedediah Kane was there, a grim, solitary figure at the back of the crowd, a testament to the fact that while he had been defeated, he had not been banished. Elias had insisted he be allowed to stay, a quiet act of mercy that was, in its own way, more powerful than any punishment. Elias did not move into a grand mansion on a hill. He moved into the small, sturdy farmhouse with Elspeth and Maya. He expanded it, his skilled hands adding a new wing, a wider porch, a study filled with books. But he kept its heart, its simple, honest character, intact. He continued to manage his vast business empire from a distance, using the telegraph and his trusted counsel, Julian Croft, but his true life was here, in this valley, with his new family. Years passed. The Valley of Serenity Gap flourished. The new schoolhouse was filled with the sounds of children learning. The farms prospered with fair access to water. The town of Redemption, once a place of fear and suspicion, became a community of neighbors. The story of the widow, the ghost, and the child with the biscuit became a local legend, a founding myth for the town's new identity. It was a story told to children around winter fires, a reminder that the smallest act of kindness could have the power to move mountains, to change the course of a river, and to heal the deepest wounds of the human heart. One evening, an elderly Elspeth and Elias sat on their porch, watching a teenage Maya teaching her own small son how to carve a bird from a piece of wood. The wind that blew through the valley no longer spoke of loss. It whispered of contentment, of peace, of a love that had been tested and had endured. Elias took Elspeth's hand, his touch still as warm and steady as it had been all those years ago. "She has your eyes," he said, looking at their daughter, "and her grandmother's heart." Elspeth replied softly, her gaze drifting to the old, splintered fence post at the edge of their property. It was still there, a humble, weathered monument to the day their world had changed. The bread was long gone, but the nourishment it had provided had lasted a lifetime. It had fed a starving man, yes, but it had also fed a starving hope, and from that single miraculous seed, an entire world of love had grown.